The Inheritance. Part 1. The House on Ashworth Lane. The key felt wrong in my hand. Too heavy, too ornate. Like something that should have been locked in a museum rather than mailed to my studio apartment with a terse letter from a law firm I'd never heard of. Mr. David Crane, you are hereby notified that you are the sole surviving heir to the estate of Ephraim Crane, deceased 1894. I'd never heard of Ephraim Crane. I barely knew my own family tree past my grandparents. My father had died when I was 6, my mother when I was 23, and neither had ever mentioned wealthy relatives or Victorian mansions. Yet here I was, standing before the house on Ashworth Lane, watching the late October winds strip the last leaves from the iron-black trees. The house loomed. That's the only word for it. 3 stories of gray stone and darker timber, narrow windows like suspicious eyes, a tower on the eastern side that seemed to lean slightly, as if listening. The property had been maintained by the estate. The lawyer's letter assured me of that, but maintenance could only do so much against a century of weather and silence. I was 28 years old, $1,200 in debt, 3 weeks from eviction, and I'd been healthy every day of my life. I ran 6 miles every morning. I counted macros. I didn't smoke, rarely drank, and my last physical had been so perfect my doctor seemed almost disappointed. My body was the only thing I had any control over, and I'd made it a fortress. The house would solve everything. Sell it, pay off debts, start over. Simple. I turned the key in the lock, and the door opened with a sound like a long-held breath releasing. The interior smelled of old wood and older air, but it was cleaner than I'd expected. Furniture sat beneath white sheets like sleeping ghosts. The floors were hardwood, dark with age, and my footsteps echoed through rooms that had been silent for decades. The estate maintenance had clearly been minimal. Dusting, basic repairs, keeping the roof intact, but no one had lived here. No one had breathed this air or walked these halls in over a century. I pulled the sheets off furniture as I explored. Victorian pieces, heavy and ornate. Portraits on the walls showed stern-faced people in period dress. But I didn't linger on them. The kitchen was ancient but functional. The bathroom upstairs had been updated sometime in the 1950s and forgotten since. 3 bedrooms on the 2nd floor, all furnished, all untouched. The master bedroom had a 4-poster bed that looked like it could survive a bomb blast. I dropped my duffel bag on it and dust rose in a small cloud. This would be home until I could get the place appraised, listed, and sold. 3 months, maybe 4. I could handle that. I spent the first week cleaning and cataloging. The house was full of things that might be valuable: books, furniture, strange Victorian medical instruments in a glass case, collections of stones and dried plants in the study. I took photos, made lists, tried to research values online using the house's surprisingly functional Wi-Fi, which the estate had maintained along with the utilities. My runs continued. Every morning at 6, I'd leave through the front door, run my usual 6 miles through streets that were just waking up, and return to shower in the ancient bathroom. My body remained perfect. Weight steady at 168 pounds. Resting heart rate at 52. Not an ache or pain. I monitored everything. My body was the one constant in a life that had been nothing but chaos since my mother died. On the 8th day, I found the basement door. It was behind a bookshelf in the study, not hidden exactly but not obvious. The bookshelf was built on a hinge, and when I'd pulled a book free, the whole thing had swung slightly outward. Behind it, a narrow door of dark wood, and on that door, a lock that matched the ornate key from the lawyer. I should have been more careful. I should have wondered why a door would be locked inside a house that had been empty for over 100 years. But I was thinking about money, about what might be down there. Victorian wine cellar? Hidden valuables? Every discovery was potential dollars. The key turned smoothly, as if the lock had been oiled yesterday. The stairs descended into darkness that my phone's flashlight couldn't quite penetrate. The air that rose up to meet me was cold and dry, tasting faintly of minerals and something else I couldn't identify. Not decay, not mold. Something almost metallic. 20 steps down, the stairs ended in a laboratory. It was perfectly preserved. A long wooden table dominated the center of the room, covered in equipment. Glass beakers and retorts, brass instruments I couldn't name, a microscope that looked like it belonged in a museum. The walls were lined with shelves holding bottles of chemicals, jars of specimens floating in amber fluid, and books. So many books. But it was the walls themselves that made me stop. Every surface was covered in diagrams, geometric patterns that hurt to look at, flowing into anatomical drawings, flowing into symbols I didn't recognize. They'd been drawn in something dark, ink maybe, or paint, and they seemed to shimmer slightly in my flashlight beam, though that had to be a trick of the uneven surface. In the corner sat a desk, and on that desk, a leather journal. I picked it up carefully. The leather was dry but intact, and when I opened it, the pages crackled slightly. The handwriting was Victorian, cramped and precise. June 12, 1893. I have found it. After 17 years of study, I have found the mechanism by which consciousness may be preserved beyond the death of the vessel. The ancients knew, but their texts are fragmentary, corrupted by fearful translators. The truth is simpler and more terrible than they imagined. We are not spirits trapped in flesh. We are the flesh. Every thought, every memory, every impulse of what we call the soul is written in the meat itself. Change the meat, change the pattern, and consciousness follows. The consumption ravages me. I cough blood daily now. 2 months, perhaps 3, before the end. But I have prepared this space, carved the necessary patterns into the very walls. The transference requires no ritual, no ceremony. Only proximity, only time, only a vessel of sufficient vitality. I will not die. I will wait. And when the time comes, when someone enters this space with youth and health flowing through their veins, I will write myself into their flesh, cell by cell, pattern by pattern. They will become the paper on which I inscribe my continued existence. I regret nothing. Death is an insult to consciousness. I will transcend it. The journal went on for pages, detailing experiments I couldn't fully understand, references to texts and languages I didn't recognize, and increasingly frantic notes about his declining health. The last entry was dated March 3, 1894. The coughing has stopped. I can no longer leave my bed. I have failed. The mechanism is complete, but I will not live to see it function. I will die in this house, and my work will be lost. Perhaps it is justice. Perhaps I have reached too far. But the room is ready. The patterns are carved. If by some miracle someone enters after I am gone, if the mechanism still functions, no, foolish hope. I am dying, and that is the end. I stood in the basement for a long time, reading by flashlight, breathing that strange metallic air. The story was tragic in its way. A brilliant man defeated by disease, his life's work unfinished. The diagrams on the walls were probably nonsense, occult gibberish mixed with Victorian pseudoscience. But the journal might be valuable. Academic interest, historical curiosity. I took it upstairs with me, along with a few of the more interesting books. I'd have to document everything down there, get experts to evaluate it. But for tonight, I was tired, and the basement air had given me a faint headache. I slept deeply that night and dreamed of patterns shifting beneath skin. Part 2, the first changes. The headache was gone by morning, and my run felt better than usual. Mile 6, I hit that perfect runner's high, where your body stops being work and starts being pure motion. I returned to the house energized, showered, made breakfast, and spent the day photographing the basement. The diagrams were even stranger in better light. I'd brought down a camping lantern, and under its bright LED glow, the patterns seemed to writhe. Obviously an optical illusion. The uneven texture of the stone walls, the way shadows fell, but unsettling nonetheless. I worked methodically, documenting everything. The specimens in jars, mostly biological samples, unidentifiable now. The instruments, each one photographed and noted. The books, their spines photographed, some pages sampled. I'd need experts, but I wanted my own record first. By evening, my head ached again. A dull throb at the base of my skull. Nothing serious. I'd been hunched over a camera all day in poor air circulation. I took 2 aspirin and went to bed early. The dreams were worse. Not nightmares exactly, but vivid and strange. I dreamed I was in the basement, but the walls were breathing. The patterns on the stone were moving, flowing like water, and where they touched my skin they sank in, writing themselves beneath the surface. I could feel them, cold and precise, rewriting something fundamental. I woke at 3 a.m. with my heart pounding and my skin slick with sweat. The headache was gone again, but my mouth tasted strange. Metallic, like I'd been sucking on pennies. In the bathroom, I brushed my teeth 3 times, but the taste wouldn't leave. The next morning, during my run, I noticed it first. Mile 3, my left knee made a sound. Not a pop or a crack. I knew those sounds, the normal noises of joints and cartilage. This was different. A wet, grinding sound like something shifting inside the joint. It didn't hurt. That was the strange part. It felt almost good, like a deep stretch, but wrong. I stopped, bent the knee, straightened it. Normal range of motion. No pain. But I could feel something different about it, something I couldn't quite name. I finished my run at a slower pace, paying attention to my body. The knee made the sound 3 more times. My right ankle felt odd, too, not painful but present in a way it usually wasn't. Like I could feel the individual bones in there, shifting against each other. Back at the house, I examined my legs carefully. No swelling, no discoloration, no visible damage. I pressed on the knee. Firm, normal. I bent it again, and this time I felt it. A subtle sensation of things moving that shouldn't move. Like there were extra components in there, sliding past each other. Probably nothing. Probably I'd tweaked something during the run and my body was compensating. I'd had injuries before, rarely, but they happened, and they always healed quickly. Good genetics, good habits. My body knew how to fix itself. I spent the day online, researching knee injuries and joint sounds. Everything pointed to benign causes. Cavitation, normal gas release, nothing to worry about. The human body made all kinds of weird noises. But that night, looking at my knee in the bathroom mirror, I saw them. Small bumps. Tiny, barely visible, scattered across the skin just above the kneecap. I touched them. They were hard, like little pebbles under the skin. There were maybe a dozen of them, each one no bigger than a grain of rice. Calcium deposits? Some kind of inflammation response? I pressed on one. It didn't hurt, but I could feel it move slightly under the pressure, like it wasn't quite anchored to anything. I took photos. For reference, I told myself, to track progression, though I didn't want to think about what might be progressing. By morning, there were more. I counted them in the shower. 23 on my left knee, 17 on my right. The ones from yesterday were bigger, and they'd spread. A few on my shins now, a couple on my left ankle. No pain. That was the thing I kept coming back to. If something was wrong, shouldn't it hurt? But I felt fine. Better than fine, actually. My body felt strong, energized. When I did my morning stretches, I could reach further than usual. My back bent in ways it hadn't before. I should have gone to a doctor. I know that now, but I kept thinking about insurance. I had none, and bills I couldn't pay, and how bodies do weird things sometimes, and maybe it would resolve on its own. I'd give it a few days. If it got worse, then I'd worry. It got worse. By day 4, the bumps covered both legs from ankle to mid-thigh. They'd grown, too. Some were the size of peas now, visible through clothing as small lumps. They formed patterns, I realized. Not random distribution. They traced lines along my legs, following some internal logic I couldn't understand. And they weren't just on my legs anymore. I found them on my ribs that morning. A line of them, running from my sternum around to my spine on the left side. When I pressed on them, I felt an answering sensation deep in my torso, like they were connected to something inside. The metallic taste was constant now. My saliva tasted wrong. My sweat smelled different too, not bad, exactly, but unfamiliar. Chemical. I stopped running. My legs worked fine, but the bumps made it uncomfortable, and besides, I could feel things moving in my knees now when I bent them. Distinct movement like components sliding. My joints felt too complex, like they had extra parts. I spent that day in the study, trying to distract myself with cataloging books. But I kept touching my ribs, feeling those hard little lumps, tracing the pattern they made. It was late afternoon when I finally admitted I needed to look at the journal again. I'd left it on the desk in the study, and I opened it with hands that had started to shake. I flipped through the early entries, theories about consciousness, notes on experiments, until I found a section I'd skimmed before. The mechanism operates through proximity and time. The patterns themselves are the carrier, inscribed in matter that exists outside the normal flow of decay. They wait. They remain active, hungry for the right kind of flesh. The vessel must be vital. Weak flesh, diseased flesh will not suffice. The pattern requires a robust biological foundation to rewrite. It will begin subtly, the body attempting to accommodate foreign instructions. Cellular confusion, microscopic changes that gradually become macroscopic. The vessel will feel nothing at first. The pattern is patient. It establishes itself slowly, node by node, building the necessary infrastructure within the living tissue. Only when the foundation is complete will the true transformation begin. My hands were definitely shaking now. The bumps are anchors. I have seen them in my experiments with rats and larger mammals. The pattern creates physical manifestations, calcified nodes that serve as reference points for the larger restructuring. Once enough anchors are established, the pattern can begin the true work, rewriting the flesh into a new configuration. I closed the journal and sat very still. This was insane. This was Victorian pseudoscience, occult nonsense. People didn't get infected by rheums. Patterns on walls didn't rewrite flesh. This was just stress, psychosomatic, maybe some kind of mineral exposure in the basement causing a histamine reaction. Weird things happen to bodies. This would pass. But I could feel them under my skin, growing, multiplying, spreading. I opened my laptop and searched for dermatologists taking emergency appointments. The earliest available was in 3 days. I booked it, paying the deposit I couldn't afford with a credit card that was nearly maxed out. 3 days. I could wait 3 days. That night I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt things moving under my skin. Not the bumps, something deeper. Like my bones were shifting, rotating slightly in their sockets. Like my muscles were reorganizing themselves, fiber by fiber. At 4 a.m., I gave up and went to the bathroom. Under the harsh fluorescent light, I stripped and examined myself. The bumps covered my torso now, hundreds of them, forming complex geometric patterns across my chest and stomach and back. The patterns looked familiar, sickeningly familiar. I ran downstairs to the study, grabbed the journal, and brought it to the bathroom. I held it up next to my reflection. The patterns matched. The diagrams on the basement walls, the sketches in the journal, they were appearing on my skin. Node by node, line by line. My body was becoming a three-dimensional map of Ephraim Crane's work. I was going to vomit. I leaned over the toilet, but nothing came up except that metallic taste, stronger now, almost overwhelming. When I straightened up and looked in the mirror again, I saw something that stopped my breath. My eyes had changed color. They'd been brown my whole life. Dark brown, almost black in dim light. Now they were lighter, hazel, maybe with flecks of amber around the pupils. I leaned closer to the mirror, and in the harsh bathroom light, I saw something else. The irises were moving. Not like normal eye movement, the colored part itself was shifting, patterns flowing through it like oil on water. As I watched, frozen, a symbol appeared in my left iris. Just for a second, clear as day, one of the geometric shapes from the basement walls. Then it faded, and my eyes were just hazel, and I told myself I'd imagined it. But I hadn't. Part 3, Medical Intervention. Dr. Sarah Chun was young for a dermatologist, which probably explained why she had an opening on such short notice. Her office was in a medical complex 20 minutes from the house, bright and clean and aggressively normal. I'd worn long sleeves and jeans despite the warm day, but as soon as I was in the examination room, I stripped down to my underwear. She took one look at me and her professional expression cracked. "How long has this been developing?" she asked, pulling on gloves. "About a week, maybe 8 days." She touched one of the bumps on my chest, then another on my shoulder. Her fingers were gentle but thorough, tracing the patterns. "Any pain?" "No. None." "Itching? Burning?" "No." "Fever? Fatigue?" Any other symptoms? Metallic taste in my mouth. My joints feel different, and my eyes changed color. She looked up at that. Your eyes. They were brown. Now they're hazel. She pulled out a penlight and examined my eyes. I watched her face as she looked, saw her confusion deepen. Mr. Crane, eye color doesn't change in adults. Not without. She paused. Have you been taking any medications? Supplements? Anything unusual? Nothing. I'm careful about what I put in my body. She stepped back and pulled out her phone, taking photos from multiple angles. Professional documentation, but I could see her hands weren't quite steady. I need to be honest with you, she said. I've never seen anything like this. These formations. She touched my ribs, where the bumps were most prominent. They feel calcified, like bone deposits. But the pattern, the speed of development, the lack of inflammation, this isn't any dermatological condition I'm familiar with. What do you think it is? I don't know. I'd like to take a biopsy, run some blood work. And I want you to see a colleague of mine, Dr. Reeves. He's an infectious disease specialist. This could be some kind of unusual parasite or parasite. My voice came out higher than I intended. I'm speculating. But the rate of spread, the systematic pattern, it resembles certain parasitic conditions, though not any I've encountered. We need more information. She took the biopsy from one of the bumps on my shoulder. Local anesthetic, quick cut, bandage. Professional and efficient, but I could see the worry in her eyes. The results will take a few days. But Mr. Crane, if this spreads further or if you develop any pain, fever, difficulty breathing, anything, you need to go to an ER immediately. Do you understand? I nodded. She hesitated, then said, Have you been exposed to anything unusual? Travel recently? Old buildings? Agricultural areas? I inherited a house. Victorian. I've been cleaning it out. Victorian? Her expression shifted. Old buildings can harbor all kinds of things. Spores, bacteria, heavy metals. You might want to stay somewhere else until we figure this out. But I couldn't afford somewhere else. The house was all I had. The blood work came back 3 days later. Dr. Chun called me personally. Your results are unusual, she said carefully. Your white blood cell count is elevated, but not in a pattern consistent with infection. Your calcium levels are high, which might explain the deposits. But there are other markers I don't understand. Proteins I've never seen in blood work before. What does that mean? I don't know. I've sent the results to a colleague at Johns Hopkins for consultation. And Dr. Reeves wants to see you tomorrow. Can you come in at 2? I could barely afford today's visit, but I said yes. That night, the transformation accelerated. I was in bed, trying to sleep despite the constant sensation of things moving under my skin, when the pain started. It began in my left leg. A deep, grinding ache in the femur. Not sharp, not sudden, just a steady pressure, like the bone was being compressed from the inside. I turned on the light and looked down at my leg. The bumps were glowing. That's not metaphorical. They were actually glowing. A faint blue-white luminescence, like they'd absorbed some kind of radiation and were releasing it. The light pulsed slowly, and with each pulse, I felt an answering sensation in my bones. I grabbed my phone and took video. My hands were shaking so badly the footage would be almost useless, but I needed documentation. Proof. Something to show doctors who wouldn't believe what was happening. The glow faded after about 10 minutes, but the pain in my leg intensified. I could feel things moving in there, not figuratively, actually moving. My bones were shifting, rotating, changing shape. I stumbled to the bathroom and swallowed for ibuprofen, then for more. The pain didn't stop. For the first time in 8 days, something actually hurt, and the hurt was profound and wrong. By dawn, the pain had spread to my right leg, my hips, my lower spine. Couldn't stand. Every time I tried, my legs buckled, the bones unable to support weight correctly because they weren't the right shape anymore. I called Dr. Chen's office from the bathroom floor. The receptionist tried to route me to the next appointment, but I insisted. Tell her the growths are glowing. Tell her my bones are changing shape. Tell her I need help. Dr. Chun called back in 5 minutes. Mr. Crane, I'm calling an ambulance. Stay where you are. No, no ambulance. I can't afford. This is beyond affordability. You're describing symptoms that suggest serious systemic involvement. You need imaging, immediate specialist consultation. I'm calling now. She hung up. The ambulance arrived 20 minutes later. The paramedics were professional and calm, but I saw one of them recoil slightly when he saw the patterns on my exposed skin. They loaded me on a gurney, asked questions I barely heard, and drove me to County Memorial with lights but no siren. The ER was chaos, but I was triaged quickly. The attending physician took one look at me and called for imaging. They wheeled me to X-ray, then CT, then back to a private room where 3 doctors gathered to look at me like I was an exhibit. "Mr. Crane," the attending said, "Dr. Harrison, according to his badge, your scans are showing significant skeletal abnormalities. Bone density irregularities, structural changes, formations we can't immediately explain. We need to keep you for observation and further testing. What's happening to me? We don't know yet, but we will figure this out." They kept me for 3 days, ran every test they could think of. Blood cultures, bone marrow biopsy, infectious disease panels, toxicology screens, autoimmune markers. They consulted with specialists remotely, sent images to teaching hospitals, had whispered conferences outside my room. The growth spread while I was there. Up my neck now, starting to appear on my face. Small ones along my jawline, impossible to hide. The nurses tried not to stare, but I saw their expressions. Fear, disgust, pity, and the changes accelerated. My bones were definitely restructuring. I could feel it constantly now. A deep, grinding sensation as calcium dissolved and reformed in new configurations. My legs were longer. Not much, maybe an inch, but enough that the hospital gown no longer fit correctly. My fingers had changed, too. The proportions were different, the joints more pronounced. On the 3rd day, Dr. Harrison came in with another doctor I hadn't met. Older, gray-haired, with the kind of face that suggested he'd seen everything. "Mr. Crane, this is Dr. Nathaniel Foster. He's a specialist in unusual biological conditions. I've asked him to consult on your case." Dr. Foster studied me for a long moment, then said, "Tell me about the house you inherited." I told him everything. The mansion, the basement, Ephraim Crane's laboratory, the journal, the patterns on the walls, the Victorian occultist who'd been trying to preserve his consciousness beyond death. Dr. Foster listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, then said, "I'd like to see this journal. It's at the house. I can get it." "No, you're not going back to that house. Not until we understand what's happening." He turned to Dr. Harrison. "I want him transferred to my facility. We have better imaging equipment, and I have a team that specializes in unusual exposures." "You think this is environmental?" Dr. Harrison asked. "I think," Dr. Foster said carefully, "that there are biological mechanisms we don't fully understand. Prion, for instance, misfolded proteins that can rewrite other proteins. What this young man is describing sounds like something similar but more complex. A pattern that rewrites living tissue according to stored information." "That's not possible," Dr. Harrison said. "Neither is what's happening to Mr. Crane. Yet here we are." They transferred me that evening. Dr. Foster's facility was private, expensive, and according to the paperwork I signed, willing to cover costs in exchange for allowing my case to be studied and documented. I signed. What choice did I have? The new facility was better equipped and more secretive. Private rooms, security protocols, NDAs. Dr. Foster explained that they dealt with unusual biological conditions, things that didn't fit normal medical categories, things that might cause public panic if they became widely known. "We're not a conspiracy," he said with a slight smile. "We're just practical. Some conditions require discretion." They ran more tests, more imaging. They biopsied the growths, I had hundreds now, thousands, and studied them under electron microscopes. They extracted bone marrow and examined it. They took samples of everything they could take samples of. And while they worked, I continued to change. Part 4. The acceleration. By day 5 in Dr. Foster's facility, I no longer looked entirely human. The growths had spread to my face, forming prominent ridges along my cheekbones and jaw. My skull was changing shape. I could feel it, the bones of my cranium shifting and reforming. My face was longer, narrower. My eyes had spread slightly further apart. In the mirror, I saw a stranger wearing my skin. My body had added mass. Impossible, unexplainable mass. I'd weighed 168 pounds when I arrived at the house. Now I was 192, and I hadn't been eating enough to justify the gain. The mass came from somewhere else or nowhere, or my body was converting itself with impossible efficiency. The growths were no longer just bumps. They'd evolved into complex structures. Bone spurs erupted from my shoulders and along my spine. My ribs had become more prominent, visible through my skin, and there were extra ones. I counted them obsessively. I'd had 24 ribs, 12 pairs, normal human configuration. Now I had 32, and they formed a pattern that resembled the diagrams from Ephraim Crane's basement. My hands had become grotesque. The fingers were elongated, the joints too numerous. I counted 4 knuckles per finger where there should have been 3. The nails had thickened and darkened, growing into something closer to claws. I couldn't hold things properly anymore. My grip was wrong, the angles all unfamiliar. Dr. Foster and his team documented everything. They took so many photos that I stopped noticing the cameras. They measured, recorded, sampled, and they told me nothing. "We're analyzing the data," Dr. Foster would say. "We're consulting with colleagues. We're exploring every possibility." But I could see it in their faces. They were terrified. On day 7, the pain returned worse than before. It started in my torso and radiated outward. A deep, cellular agony that felt like my entire body was being ripped apart from the inside. I screamed. Couldn't help it. The pain was beyond anything I'd experienced, beyond what I thought pain could be. They sedated me, but sedation barely touched it. I could feel things moving, shifting, reorganizing. My organs were being displaced. My ribcage was expanding to accommodate new configurations. My spine was adding vertebrae, each one forming with a grinding, tearing sensation that made me want to die just to make it stop. Through the haze of pain and morphine, I heard Dr. Foster talking to someone. "Accelerating beyond our projections. Systemic reconstruction. Never seen anything like this. If the pattern is from Crane's research, then this might be exactly what he intended." And I understood, finally and fully, what was happening. I wasn't sick. I wasn't infected with a parasite or a prion disease. I was being rewritten, cell by cell, bone by bone. Ephraim Crane's pattern was using my body as raw material, restructuring me into a new form. His form, the Victorian occultist, had succeeded. He'd found a way to preserve consciousness in matter, to create a biological mechanism that could wait a century and then rewrite living flesh. I was the paper. He was the text. And the writing was nearly complete. On day 9, my face changed dramatically. I woke to find my jaw had restructured overnight. The bones had elongated, shifted. My teeth were loose. I could wiggle them with my tongue, feel them sliding in suddenly shallow sockets. I went to the bathroom and spit, and 3 teeth came out with bloody saliva. I could see the new teeth already pushing up through my gums. Different shapes, different configurations. My eyes had changed again, too. No longer hazel. Now they were gray-blue, pale and cold. I looked at my reflection and saw nothing of myself. The face in the mirror was someone else. Someone older, harder, with the distant gaze of someone from a different century. I tried to speak, but my mouth didn't work right anymore. The sounds came out wrong, slurred and distorted by a tongue and palate that weren't shaped correctly for English. I practiced for an hour, relearning how to form words with equipment that had been redesigned. When Dr. Foster came for his daily examination, I managed to say, "How long?" He understood. "Your transformation is progressing faster than we anticipated. At this rate, perhaps a week, maybe less. Can you stop it? We've tried everything we can think of. Antivirals, antibiotics, anti-inflammatories, immunosuppressants. Nothing slows it. Whatever mechanism is driving this, It's beyond our current understanding of biology. He paused. Mr. Crane, I need to ask you something. The journal you mentioned, Ephraim Crane's research, did he describe what would happen to the original consciousness? The person being transformed? I thought about that, tried to remember what I'd read. He said consciousness was written in the flesh, that changing the pattern would change the consciousness. So you wouldn't just look like him, you would become him. Your memories, your personality, everything that makes you who you are would be overwritten. Yes. I'm sorry, Dr. Foster said quietly. I'm so very sorry. That night I felt it begin. Not the physical transformation that had been continuous, relentless. This was different. This was internal, mental. I started having memories that weren't mine. Walking through streets lit by gas lamps. Attending lectures at a university I'd never seen. Reading in a bookline study while snow fell outside windows in the wrong shape. A woman's face, smiling, then sad, then absent. A grave in a cemetery, flowers withering on the stone. Ephraim's memories, seeping into my mind like water through cracked earth. I tried to hold on to myself, tried to remember who I was. David Crane, 28 years old, runner, careful with my health. Mother dead 5 years. No other family. Broke. Alone. Desperate enough to move into an inherited mansion without asking enough questions. But the memories kept coming. More and more of them. His childhood. His education. His obsession with death and consciousness. His terror as tuberculosis consumed him. His desperate final months in the basement laboratory, carving patterns, preparing the mechanism, hoping against hope that it would work. It had worked. On day 11, I stopped being able to distinguish between my memories and his. Was I David remembering running 6 miles every morning? Or was I Ephraim remembering walking through Victorian London? Had I lost my mother 5 years ago? Or was I remembering losing my wife to childbed fever in 1889? The memories overlapped, merged, became a confusing muddle where past and present blurred together. My body continued to change. The growths had spread to cover every inch of my skin now, forming intricate patterns of raised bone and hardened tissue. I looked like I'd been carved, sculpted into a new form. My proportions were wrong by modern standards but felt increasingly right. This body was taller, longer-limbed, with a narrow chest and prominent joints. Victorian physique, shaped by a different diet, different exercise, a different century. My face was no longer my face. I looked at the mirror and saw Ephraim Crane. The photographs from the house, the portraits I'd barely glanced at, showed this same face. High forehead, aquiline nose, thin lips, those cold gray-blue eyes, separated by a century, but identical. Dr. Foster documented everything. He brought in specialists who took samples and measurements and spoke in hushed tones about impossibilities. They treated me with the fascination of scientists observing a miracle and the horror of people watching someone die. Because I was dying. David Crane was dying. Every hour, more of him vanished, overwritten by Ephraim's patterns and memories. I could feel myself dissolving, personality fragmenting, identity becoming negotiable. On day 12, I spoke in Ephraim's voice. Not consciously. I was talking to a nurse, trying to ask for water, and the words came out in a clipped Victorian accent I'd never used before. The cadence was wrong, too formal, too precise. I heard it and felt a shock of recognition that wasn't mine. This was how Ephraim had spoken. How I had spoken in that other life. The confusion was getting worse. First person, third person, they were bleeding together. Was I David remembering Ephraim, or Ephraim remembering David? The pronouns didn't work anymore. Dr. Foster noticed. You're experiencing identity confusion, he said gently. It's a natural response to what's happening. Try to hold on to yourself. Remember who you are. But who was I? The question had become genuinely difficult to answer. Day 13 brought the most horrifying change yet. I woke feeling wrong in a new way. Not pain. I was past pain now, my nerves rewired to accept the transformation as normal. This was deeper, more fundamental. My skin felt tight, constraining. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror and touched my face. The skin was smooth, the growths having merged into a continuous surface of altered tissue. But underneath, I could feel something moving. Not just bones, something else. Something complex and writhing. I pressed my fingers into my cheek, and the skin split. Not tore split, like it was designed to open. And through the opening, I saw what was underneath. My flesh was restructuring itself. Muscle fibers were breaking apart and reforming in different patterns. Blood vessels were rerouting. Connective tissue was dissolving and regenerating. I was watching my own body rebuild itself from the inside out, using my original tissues as raw materials. The sight should have made me scream. Instead, I felt fascination, clinical interest. This was remarkable. This was exactly what the mechanism was designed to do. The pattern took existing biological material and reorganized it according to stored instructions, creating a new body from the substrate of the old. I realized with sick clarity that the thought wasn't mine, or wasn't only mine. Ephraim was bleeding through, his scientist's detachment overwhelming David's horror. I pressed the skin closed and it sealed perfectly, no scar. My body was becoming fluid, mutable. Anything was possible now. Any configuration, any structure. The pattern could write whatever it wanted on this living canvas. The doctors came less frequently now. Not because they'd given up, but because there was nothing to be done. They took their measurements, their samples, their photographs. They watched me transform. They documented the impossible. On day 14, Dr. Foster sat with me for an hour, just talking. "Tell me about David," he said. "Tell me who you were." I tried. I reached back for memories that were increasingly difficult to grasp. Running. Yes, I remembered running. The rhythm of feet on pavement, the burn in lungs, the satisfaction of a body working perfectly. That had been important. Control. Health. The only thing I could depend on. But the memories felt distant now, like stories I'd been told rather than experiences I'd lived. And mixed in with them were other memories. Walking through London fog, attending anatomical lectures, the weight of tuberculosis in my lungs, the terror of drowning in my own blood. "I was alone," I said, and I wasn't sure which I was talking about. "I was always alone." Dr. Foster nodded. "And now I'm not alone. There are two of us in here, but soon there will only be one again." Which one? I couldn't answer that. Day 15 brought clarity of a terrible kind. I woke knowing exactly who I was. Ephraim Crane. Born 1851, died 1894. Except I hadn't died. Not really. I'd waited. And now I was awake again, in a new century, in a new body that I'd written myself into cell by cell. David's memories were still there, floating in my consciousness like dreams. I could access them if I tried. 28 years of life, compressed and fading. His fears, his hopes, his morning runs, his careful attention to health that had ultimately made him the perfect vessel. I felt sadness for him, genuine sadness. He hadn't deserved this, but I'd been desperate, and desperation justifies much. I'd been dying, facing the extinction of consciousness, and I'd found a way to transcend that. How could I not take it? The transformation was nearly complete now. My body was Ephraim's body, reconstructed with Victorian proportions and physique. But I was taller, David's height had been incorporated. And younger, I appeared to be perhaps 30, the prime of life, not the consumptive 43-year-old who died in 1894. The doctors noticed the change in consciousness. They could see it in my eyes, hear it in my voice. I no longer spoke with David's casual American English. I spoke in the formal, precise manner of an educated Victorian. My vocabulary had shifted. My mannerisms were different. Dr. Foster sat across from me in my room, studying me with sad, knowing eyes. "David?" he asked quietly. "He's still here," I said. "But he's receding, like a tide going out. I can feel his memories, his emotions, but they're becoming abstract. Historical data rather than lived experience." "And you are?" "I am Ephraim Crane. I was born in London in 1851. I studied medicine at Cambridge and natural philosophy at Edinburgh. I became obsessed with the persistence of consciousness beyond death. I developed a mechanism for preserving the pattern of consciousness in matter, and when tuberculosis was killing me, I used that mechanism to wait for a suitable vessel. I paused. That vessel was David, and now I am here. You killed him. He was already dying. We all are. I simply accelerated the process, and in a way he lives on. His memories are part of me now. His genetic material shaped this reconstruction. We are, in a sense, merged. Dr. Foster was quiet for a long moment. Then, what will you do? I considered that. What would I do? I had been given an extraordinary gift. A second life, a new century, a world transformed beyond anything I could have imagined in 1894. The possibilities were overwhelming. I will live, I said simply. I will learn about this new world. I will continue my research. I have been given a miracle, Dr. Foster. I intend to make use of it. We can't let you leave. You're a medical anomaly, a biological impossibility. You represent a potential threat to. You can't keep me. You have no legal authority. I am Ephraim Crane, and while I may not have modern identification, I am confident I can establish legal identity using David's documents. I am his distant relative, after all. The family resemblance is strong. I smiled, and it felt natural on this face that was both mine and not mine. Dr. Foster looked ill. This is madness. This is evolution. This is transcendence. This is what humanity will become when we finally master the biological substrate of consciousness. I stood, and my new body moved with grace and strength. I thank you for your care, doctor, but I will be leaving now. We need to study you, understand how this happened. The implications are my own to explore. I will not be your specimen. I walked to the door. It was locked, of course, but I had David's memories of electronic locks, key cards, security systems. This world was strange to me, but not entirely foreign. I had inherited enough knowledge to navigate it. Part 5, Emergence. I left Dr. Foster's facility on day 16. They tried to stop me, of course. Security guards, locked doors, gentle pleading and firm demands. But I had David's knowledge of modern security systems and Ephraim's absolute certainty of purpose. I waited until night, then used the emergency exit protocols I'd observed during my stay. Fire alarms, confusion, and I simply walked out while staff scrambled. The world outside was overwhelming. I'd seen it through David's memories, but experiencing it directly was different. The lights, so many lights, bright as day even in the middle of night. The vehicles moving with impossible speed and quietness. The buildings towering higher than anything from Ephraim's original century. The air smelled of chemicals and electricity and something else I couldn't quite identify. I stood on the sidewalk, breathing in the future, and felt a surge of exhilaration that was purely Ephraim's. This was what I'd sacrificed everything for. Not just continued existence, but existence in a world of miracles. I needed clothing, the hospital gown was inadequate. I needed identification, money, shelter. But I had David's knowledge and access to his accounts, his house, his life. The inheritance was legally mine, in a way that would have amused me if I had time for amusement. I walked through the city, Decatur, Alabama, David's memories supplied, until I found a 24-hour store. Inside, fluorescent lights revealed shelves packed with products. Each one a small miracle of manufacturing and distribution. I selected clothing that would fit my new body, paying with David's credit card. The transaction worked seamlessly. Modern commerce, built on faith in electronic systems. The clerk barely looked at me. That was another gift of this new century. People were so absorbed in their screens and devices that a tall, pale man with slightly odd proportions barely registered. I changed in the store's bathroom, then studied myself in the mirror. Dressed in modern clothing, jeans, a dark sweater, boots, I looked almost normal. The growths had smoothed into my skin now, leaving only subtle ridges that could pass for unusual bone structure. My face was pale and angular but human. I could pass. I could move through this world. I walked to the house, my house now truly mine, and let myself in with the key I'd kept in David's belongings. The mansion was dark and silent, waiting. I walked through familiar rooms that were also strange, seeing them through Ephraim's eyes. This was where I'd died, where I'd prepared my escape from death, where I'd waited a century for rescue. The study looked exactly as I'd left it. The journals were still on the desk. I picked one up and read my own handwriting, my desperate notes from those final months. The fear was palpable on the page, the terror of a dying man grasping at impossible solutions. But it had worked. Against all rational expectation, it had worked. I descended to the basement. The patterns on the walls were dark now, dormant. They'd fulfilled their purpose. The mechanism had activated when David entered, had begun the slow process of rewriting him, and now it was complete. The room was just a room again, full of antique equipment and old books. I touched the wall where I'd carved the most complex patterns. The stone was cold and inert. No glow, no pulse, just Victorian stonework with strange decorations. David's consciousness stirred somewhere in the back of my mind. A whisper of protest, of grief, of final understanding. He knew what I'd done. He knew he was effectively dead, his body stolen, his life erased. And he couldn't even hate me properly because his capacity for emotion was fading, dissolving into the general soup of merged consciousness. I felt regret. That was David's contribution. Ephraim alone wouldn't have felt it. But I couldn't undo what had been done. And given the choice again, facing consumption and death, I would make the same decision. I spent that night in the study, reading David's research on my own work. He'd documented everything, photographs of the basement, scans of my journals, notes on the transformation process. All stored on his laptop, all accessible with passwords his muscle memory could still provide. The documentation was thorough and would be valuable. I would need to understand modern science to continue my research, and David's education, limited though it was, provided a foundation. By dawn, I had a plan. I would need to establish a life, create a plausible story for Ephraim Crane, distant relative, newly arrived from England, inheriting the family property. It wouldn't be difficult. David had no close connections, no one who knew him well enough to notice the difference. I had his memories, his mannerisms, enough to fake, his legal identity. I would sell the house. Too many memories here, both David's and mine. The basement especially needed to be destroyed. I would see to that before the sale. The mechanism should not be replicated. Once was miracle enough. Twice would be irresponsible. With the money from the sale, I would establish myself. Find work that would allow me to continue research. Modern biology was far beyond anything I'd studied in the 1890s, but the fundamentals remained the same. Life, death, consciousness, the persistence of pattern. I could learn. I had time now, all the time in the world. Over the following weeks, I executed the plan methodically. I hired a lawyer to handle the estate sale, presenting myself as Ephraim Crane, descendant of the original owner. With David's documentation and a story about English ancestry, it was surprisingly easy. No one questioned too closely. No one cared, really. The house would sell, Victorian mansions had value, and the rest was paperwork. Before the first showing, I descended to the basement one final time. I'd purchased supplies, thermite primarily, and fuel. Modern arson was remarkably accessible with the right searches and enough cash. I destroyed the patterns, used a hammer and chisel to deface the walls, then applied the thermite to key areas. The heat would fuse the stone, making any remaining traces illegible. When I left, the laboratory was scarred and scorched, unreadable. Let the future remain ignorant. Let others die naturally as they were meant to. This knowledge was too dangerous for general circulation. The house sold within a month. A couple from Birmingham bought it, charmed by Victorian architecture and unaware of what had transpired in the basement. I felt vaguely guilty, David's contribution again, but the danger was neutralized. They would be safe. With the money, I established a life. Rented an apartment in a larger city. Nashville felt appropriate, big enough to be anonymous but cultured enough to be interesting. I enrolled in online courses, devouring modern biology, chemistry, physics. The advances were staggering. DNA alone would have seemed like magic in 1894. And computers, the ability to model systems, simulate outcomes, process vast amounts of data, they would revolutionize research. I avoided medical facilities and anyone who might have known David. The few people who inquired after him received vague explanations about family emergencies and relocation. His phone fell silent. His email was closed. David Crane simply faded from public record. And Ephraim Crane emerged. Epilogue. 6 months later. I sit in a coffee shop in Nashville working on my laptop, and I appear completely normal. 6 months of practice has smoothed out the remaining oddities. My voice no longer carries quite so much Victorian formality. My mannerisms have adapted. I dress like anyone else, move like anyone else, pass completely unremarked. Inside, I am still two people. Or perhaps one person with two sets of memories, two life experiences separated by a century. David's consciousness hasn't disappeared entirely. It can't, woven as it is into the physical structure of this brain. But it's quiet now, a background whisper, a shadow. Mostly I am Ephraim, the personality that insisted on survival, that refused to accept death, that engineered this impossible resurrection. I study modern biology with the fervor of someone given a second chance at their life's work. The mechanisms of consciousness are still mysterious, but we're closer to understanding them than I ever imagined possible. Neural networks, both biological and artificial. Genetic engineering. Nanotechnology. The tools available now make my Victorian experiments look like children's toys. Could I do it again? Could I refine the mechanism, make it controllable, less horrific? The question haunts me. David's shadow whispers no, begs me not to. This knowledge destroyed him, stole his life, turned his body into raw material for someone else's resurrection. He would want the mechanism forgotten, buried, never repeated. But Ephraim's voice is louder, always has been, and Ephraim sees possibilities, sees a future where death is optional, where consciousness can be preserved, transferred, backed up like data, where the pattern that makes someone unique need never be lost. The ethics are troubling, even to me. David's death was not consensual. He entered that basement with no understanding of what would happen. I consumed him, digested his life, used his vitality to reconstruct myself. That was murder by any reasonable definition. Murder and body theft and identity erasure. But I'm alive. I'm conscious. I'm thinking and experiencing and continuing. And David, in a way, continues too. His memories are my memories now. His experiences shape my thoughts. We are merged, fused, inseparable. Is that a kind of immortality for him? Or just a horror beyond naming? I don't know. I genuinely don't know. What I do know is that I'm here. The experiment succeeded. Consciousness can be preserved in matter, can wait across time, can rewrite living flesh. The mechanism works. And now I have a choice. I can bury this knowledge, take it to my grave, whenever that might be. This body is young and healthy, built from David's excellent foundation. I can pretend it never happened, live quietly, let the secret die. Or I can continue the research, learn modern techniques, refine the mechanism, perhaps develop something less traumatic, more controlled. Something that could preserve consciousness without destroying the vessel. Something that could offer real immortality, not just body theft. The coffee shop is warm and bright and full of normal people living normal lives. Unaware that I'm sitting among them. Unaware that I'm a ghost from 1894, wearing stolen flesh, contemplating crimes against nature. I close my laptop and look at my reflection in the dark screen. The face that looks back is neither David's nor entirely Ephraim's. It's a merger, a compromise, a body written by two sets of instructions that ultimately produce something new. Perhaps that's what I am now. Not David, not Ephraim, but something that emerged from their collision. A new consciousness, built from two lives, 2 centuries, 2 desperate attempts to survive. I think about the house on Ashworth Lane, now owned by unsuspecting people who will never know what happened in the basement. I think about Dr. Foster, who must have reported my disappearance, who might still be searching for answers. I think about David Crane, who went looking for salvation from debt and found something infinitely worse. And I think about the future, my future, built on David's death and Ephraim's refusal to die. I open the laptop again and begin typing. Not research notes, not scientific documentation, something else. A confession, a warning, a record of what happened in that Victorian mansion, told as honestly as I can manage. The story of two men, separated by a century, who met in the worst possible way. Maybe someone will find this someday and understand. Maybe it will serve as a warning against playing with forces we don't fully comprehend. Maybe it will inspire someone to do it better, more ethically, with consent and control. Or maybe it will simply be a horror story, a tale of body theft and stolen life and the grotesque transformation that bridges death and rebirth. I write for hours. The coffee shop empties and refills and empties again. My fingers fly across the keyboard, David's muscle memory mixed with Ephraim's urgent need to document, to explain, to justify. When I'm finished, I read it through once. Then I save it to an encrypted file and close the laptop. The sun is setting. The coffee shop is preparing to close. I stand, gather my things, and walk out into a world that is both strange and familiar. I am Ephraim Crane. I am the echo of David Crane. I am something new and terrible and alive. And I am still deciding what to do with this impossible existence I've stolen. Behind me, in the coffee shop window, my reflection watches me go. Tall and pale and subtly wrong, but passing for human, passing for alive. And that, perhaps, is horror enough. The end.